Hi, I'm Kristin Omdahl and welcome back to my studio. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this incredibly beautiful and super simple Zen striped knit scarf. We're going to be using 5 different colors. I'm going to show you very easily how to cast on, how to knit, how to change color, how to do this beautiful, simple lace pattern in the center, how to change color again, and then how to bind off to make this beautiful scarf that is long and easy to style in so many different ways. Let's get started. For this scarf, we're going to be using a size D3 or 3.25 millimeter set of knitting needles. Please use whatever size allows you to obtain gauge. And I'll be using Be So Fine yarn, which is 100% bamboo fingering weight yarn. For this project, we're going to be casting on using the knit cast on technique, and that starts with a slip knot. You want to make your slip knot and slide it onto one of your needles. And then we're going to knit into that slip knot and put that new stitch onto the same needle. So now instead of one stitch on our needle, we now have 2. And now we'll knit into that new stitch and make a new loop and put that on the same needle. And so now we have 3 stitches. If you're following the pattern, you want to knit cast on 310 stitches. For the demonstration purposes, I'm casting on 16 stitches. So now I'm ready to start row 1. And we're going to knit each stitch across. Insert your knitting needle into the first stitch. Wrap the yarn over your needle. Pull a loop through. Slide the new loop onto this needle and drop the old loop off the other needle. And repeat that all the way across. You want to turn your work, and row 2 will be knitting like every other row of the knitting. We're going to knit into the stitch into the previous row, so we're just going to knit each stitch across. Okay, and that's what the end of row 2 should look like. You want to repeat this until you have 20 rows for the first color, and after that I'll show you how to add a new color. I didn't do as many rows because this is just a demonstration, but you can imagine that this would just have more rows done if we did the full 20 rows of the first stripe. And now I'm going to show you one of the ways you can join a new color. There are lots of ways to join new colors in yarn, and this is a way that is super easy to do and something that's really easy to do when you're using a thin weight yarn. So we're going to insert our knitting needle like we're about to knit the next stitch, and we're going to wrap the new color around our finger like that and take that loop and use that for our first stitch and pull it through. Now on the next stitch, I'm going to insert my knitting needle and pull the old yarn taut so that the stitch tightens up. And we're going to use both the tail and the working yarn of the new color to knit the next couple of stitches. And this is one of the reasons why I say this works better with thin yarns, is that you're not going to notice that you're using 2 strands of yarn because the yarn's so thin. If you were using a bulkier yarn like a worsted weight or a chunky, this would be way more noticeable. And so there are other methods for using thicker yarns and joining new yarn. So I'll do a handful of stitches and then drop that tail and continue on knitting with our working yarn strand. Then the only other thing you'll have to remember is when we turn our work and work the next row, you need to remember that those two strands that we work together for a few stitches, that those are not individual stitches, they're one stitch. So I'll show you that when we get back there. So I've knit across this row, I'm going to turn my work and knit across. When we get to those doubled stitches, I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so you can see some of these stitches have double the yarn. We're going to insert our knitting needle as though they are one strand, just working them together and knit through both strands. Okay, for this particular pattern, we alternate back and forth between the two colors for 2 rows apiece before we move on to the next color. So at this point, what we're going to do is pick up our color A again, which was Passionate Plum. I'm using Be So Fine yarn in colors Passionate Plum and Tropical Hot Coral today. So now we'll pick up not the tail, but the working yarn. We'll pick up the working yarn of Passionate Plum and knit the next 2 rows. And you want to just pull on the working yarn of the last row to make sure those stitches stay taut. Okay, then we'll turn our work and knit the next row. Okay, we're done with color A now, so you can cut color A. You want to make sure you leave your tail long enough so that you have ample length for weaving in your loose ends. I like to have at least 6 inches available for weaving in my loose ends at the end. And now we're going to go back to color B, which is Tropical Hot Coral. So I've done a second main stripe and I've done my second mini stripes, which is for the transition between the 2 colors. And now I'm ready to show you the third stripe, which is the one we do in the lace stitch pattern. And in this particular lace stitch pattern, we're going to be doing the lace on every row. If you are intimidated by doing lace on every row, we could always alternate a row of plain knitting with a row of the lace. And I'll show you when we get to that point. So the lace row is to knit the first stitch, and then we're going to yarn over. I'm going to pull the color we used in the previous row taut. So yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, and we're going to repeat this all the way across the row. Notice how I'm pulling on the body of work slightly to elongate those stitches to make it easier to insert my knitting needle into both stitches to knit them together. So we'll repeat this all the way across to the last stitch and we'll knit the last stitch. Okay. So that's what the first row of the lace should look like. Now, if you don't want to knit lace on every row, on the return row or the wrong side row, you could knit each stitch across like we've done in these previous rows. Or if you want to do lace on every row, you're going to follow along the pattern like this. We're going to knit 1. Basically, we're doing exactly what we did on the last row. There's only 1 row for the lace pattern. So you're going to repeat this for the entire length of this stripe. Yarn over, knit 2 together. So basically you're knitting together the knit stitch and the yarn over stitch from the row below. And you want to make sure that you're in the right position and that you haven't skipped a stitch. You want to make sure that the knit stitch comes first and the yarn over stitch comes second. And the reason I say that is because if you get a little off skew in your row and you knit this yarn over first with this knit stitch here, then you've somehow missed a stitch. So it's a good way to recognize where you're at and make sure that you haven't missed any stitches. So we're put the yarn to the front for a yarn over, knit 2 together with the yarn over and the knit stitch, and we're going to repeat this all the way across till we get to the last stitch. Okay, and on the last stitch we're going to knit. And this is what the lace looks like after 2 rows. You want to repeat this for the entire body of this stripe. So it's knit 1, yarn over, knit 2 together, repeat yarn over, knit 2 together across the entire row until you get to the last stitch, and then knit 1 for the last stitch. Okay, so we finished our lace stripe, and now it's time to add a new color for our transition stripes. So we're going to do the same thing we did before and fold the yarn over our finger and use that loop for our first stitch to knit. And then to knit the next stitch, we're going to use both strands, the tail and the working yarn of our new yarn, and knit the next stitch. Now, because we're knitting a row after a lace row, you're going to knit each stitch and each yarn over as a separate stitch. And this is the way we'll get back to our original stitch count. So you're going to knit this stitch and then knit this yarn over. And notice how we carried the tail yarn with our working yarn for a few stitches, then dropped it, and we're now just using our working yarn for knitting every stitch. And on the return row, we're going to have to remember where we used both thicknesses so that we can knit them together and not treat them as separate stitches. And I'll show you when we get there. So we turned our work, and we're going to knit the next row. Okay, now here we're we've reached the point where we've got a double thickness of yarn for each stitch. So make sure you don't knit them as separate stitches and you knit them together, because they really are just one stitch. It's a great way to weave in some of your loose ends as you go too. Okay, we'll turn our work, and now we're ready to begin our transition stripes to go between the next 2 colors, then knit our next stripe, and we'll do that one more time for a total of 5 stripes. And then at the end, and we've done all that already, so you know how to repeat what you've done here, up here. So now the only other thing you need to learn to complete this beautiful scarf is how to do our yarn over bind off. And it is a loose bind off that very closely resembles the amount of stretch as the knit cast on we did at the beginning of our work. And how we're going to do a yarn over bind off is to knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit the next stitch, and then with our opposite needle, insert our needle into the yarn over and the first stitch and pull them up and over the second stitch to bind off. Notice how I hung onto the yarn pretty firmly in this hand so that I could keep good tension on the yarn. We're going to yarn over, knit the next stitch. Okay, now with keeping tension on the yarn, I'm going to take this needle, insert it into the yarn over and the first stitch, and pull them up and over the second stitch to bind off. And you want to repeat this all the way across the row. If you have trouble getting into that stitch, it's okay to tug a little bit on your work to elongate the stitch and make more room for your needle to fit in there. The key to a nice loose bind off is not being too tight in your stitches or any of your movements. Whoops, I forgot the yarn over. Okay, so yarn over, knit one, and pick up the first stitch and the yarn over and pull them up and over the second stitch. Follow the link in the video description to download the pattern and get more information on the yarn kit to make this beautiful scarf. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoy making this scarf as much as I do. There's so much relaxation that comes from just doing simple stitches, and when you use colors that you love, it makes it even more fun. If you have any questions about this project, please feel welcome to leave them for me in the comments. Please click the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to my channel for even more videos. Let us make time to create, share, and inspire today and every day. I'll see you in the next video.